Okay, let me know if you cannot see my screen. I will assume you can. We're here to talk about Remix, and I'm excited to give you an intro to what makes Remix so special, why I love Remix so much. And I think the best place to start is with my own website. So sorry, I'm gonna pause this. Hold on a second. I want to hide my own presentation because it's confusing, but it's okay. It's fine. So this is my old website. This is the new one. And with my old website, it worked out pretty well. This was built with static site generation with Gatsby. And it worked out because most of my site is just static stuff. It's a bunch of blog posts and stuff. And so I was pretty happy with it. At the time, Gatsby was like the big thing everybody was using, and it was awesome. And it's pretty fast. Like you go to each one of these pages, and it's just coming straight off of the CDN. So it felt really snappy. And then of course it was code split and everything as well. So I would get nice lighthouse scores and everything. So this is a little bit of a story of how I learned that nice lighthouse scores are not all that matters when it comes to user experience. So one thing that I really, I guess one thing that I ran into really early on with this website was because I had 181 blog posts at the time that I migrated. And I was processing all of these images and everything. It was using Webpack. Building my site would take around like 15 minutes on my machine without a cache, like full build everything. Getting the dev server started up only took around 30 seconds, which now, I mean, for some of you, you're like, wow, 30 seconds sounds great. And some of the apps that I used, at least 30 seconds would have been awesome. Some of the apps that I built at like PayPal, some of those would be like a minute and 30 seconds to get things started. It was a total pain. But building the whole site from scratch, no cache, would take on my machine around 10 to 15 minutes. On CI, that machine is not as powerful as mine. I use Netlify. And so with no cache on CI, it would take 30 to 40 minutes to build my site. Which, I mean, like there's a lot of stuff on here, but like, give me a break. It just took a really long time to do all of that. And so I got some help from both the Gatsby team and the Netlify team to help speed up my site. So it didn't take quite as long and it could cache heavily. But still, it was not awesome. I was not pleased with that aspect of it. And what made it even worse is that anytime I made a change to any one of my blog posts, even like somebody makes a pull request to fix a typo or something, that triggered a rebuild of the whole site. And here's the real kicker. My site did take 30 minutes or 30 to 40 minutes to build on CI, but Netlify crashes or it times out after 20 minutes. And so I could not build my site with I probably have maybe 300 or 400 pages on here because we have the podcast episodes as well. So like it's not a small amount of stuff. Each workshop has its own page, all of that stuff. But I couldn't build it without the cache. So I had to have a cache in place. And what would happen is if I needed to blow away the cache for some reason, I had to start the build. It would time out after 20 minutes. I would start another build. It would again time out after 20 minutes. And then I would start the third build. And each time it would build up the cache more and more. And on that third build, I could finally actually deploy. So that was really, really frustrating. If I needed to build without a cache. And even with a cache, it took 10 to 15 minutes to build on CI every time I needed to make a change, even if it were a simple typo or anything. This is not a new problem for static site generation techniques. Like a lot of people are aware of this problem. And this is why a new technique has come out in the last couple of years called incremental static regeneration, or ISR. What ISR says is, hey, if you only changed like a typo on this blog post, then we don't need to build all the other blog posts. We'll just build this one, and then it will speed up your build like infinity, like way faster. And that is true, but what if the typo that I changed was down here? this thing is on every single page. And so I'm right back to where things started. So like it works out okay if all you're changing is the content for one page, but you're right back to where you started if what you're changing is a content that's on every page. On top of that, it's also a vendor-specific solution. So Gatsby can't use Next.js's solution, for example. And so you're really tied into, you're bought into the framework that you're using for that particular solution. So that was one problem that I faced that was kind of annoying, but it wasn't annoying enough for me to rewrite my site. The other thing that I ran into was I started out with a site that was totally static, just static stuff, but then I added this workshops page, and the workshops page, I decided I wanted to have a listing of all the tickets that were available. So like if I was actually hosting a workshop and selling tickets to it, I wanted to show a little component right here that said, we're selling tickets right now, and here's how many we're selling. Here's how many are left. There's an early bird discount right now, whatever. And so I had a really nice component all queued up. And then I realized, oh, wait a second, I have to make a choice now. Because my site is statically generated, I have to decide, hey, do I go to the Tito API at build time to determine how many tickets there are and everything? And if I do that, well, then that could be wrong. I could build it, and then somebody could buy a ticket, and now I don't have as many tickets as I'm telling people. Or when I build it, there's an early bird discount, and now there's no longer an early bird discount. And so what you have to do then is you set up a webhook so that you can rebuild your site. But again, my site takes 10 to 15 minutes to rebuild. And so like, that's not great. That does burn trees and stuff. I don't want to have to do that. And so the alternative is I could say, well, instead of doing it at build time, what if I do it at on the client? So that the browser is the one talking to the Tito API, or maybe what I did is a serverless function that deployed with my site. So the browser would talk to the serverless function after the application is loaded, and then the serverless function could say, here are the discounts and whatever else. And that worked out pretty well, but I want you to watch closely as I refresh. Every time I refresh, you'll see this text is bumping because I've got this loading state that says loading workshop details. So when you're doing all the client-side stuff, you have to render something because we're statically generating this page. So you're going to statically generate something there. It's got to be an HTML output that you put on to the CDN. And what I put there was a loading state. Now you could argue and say, hey, well, Kent, why don't you just make your loading states look better? And yeah, I could definitely do that. But I don't think that a loading state is a really awesome user experience. I've already went through all the work to ask your server what HTML to give me. Why didn't your HTML just send me all the stuff it needed for the app to start? And so that was another thing that really bothered me, is this loading state. I don't like loading states. If you know, I already had a loading state. It was in my favicon when I refreshed. I have a spinner there, and once the HTML comes, I want it to be there. I want it to be ready. And so for those two reasons, when I did decide that my site needed a refresh and needed to redesign, I thought, hey, if I'm going to basically be rewriting this anyway, I'm 100% over with static site generation. I am not going to use static site generation ever again. And here's the real kicker for this. Static site generation says, hey, we want to have a really high time to first byte. We want to make that super duper fast. Okay, that's great, a really good goal. And so what we're going to do is we'll generate all of this HTML and we'll put it on the server on a CDN. And so that way we don't even have a server to talk to. It's just a CDN, which is a server, but like we don't have our origin server that needs to be talked to. It's just the CDN. Well, I've got news for you, friends, which is probably not news for most of you, but CDNs, you can put those in front of an origin server, and you can have the origin server set some cache headers that will tell the CDN, hey, save this. And next time somebody requests this, send the same thing. So it's a cache. And that's exactly what the static site generation is. That you're building up your cache at build time. Well, you can do the same thing with an actual server rendered app. And so if your site really is 100% static, like mine was when I got started, then you can totally still build a server rendered app and have it cache at the CDN layer without having to do any of the build time stuff. And what's really cool about that is when you do decide eventually, hey, I do want to have something that's dynamic on this page, you don't have to completely re-architect your solution. You just say, oh, we're not going to send those cache headers anymore. And now you can do all the dynamic stuff that you want. And so that's what I discovered as I was using Remix to build my new site, was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to make all the trade-offs that I made when I was doing static site generation. I can just do server-side generation for everything. And if I do happen to have any page that can be cached, that's the same for all my users, then I can just set some cache headers and I'm off to the races. I'm fine. I'm just as good as I was with static site generation. And on top of that, while we were waiting for our static build to finish, distributed web infrastructure got really, really good. And so on top of all of like the fact that you can basically do SSG with SSR, you can actually do SSR just as fast as SSG. And we have a really deep dive comparison between Next.js with SSG and Remix with full SSR. And Remix is just as fast, and in some cases faster, than Next.js at serving static content. And so the whole argument around, oh, well, let's statically generate our stuff because it makes our app fast, is so wrong. It is incorrect. And that's what I based so much of my decisions off of for the last 6 years before Remix showed up, was, well, I want to have a high time to first byte. I want to statically generate all this stuff because that means it's fast. Well, the world has changed, and that does not mean it's fast anymore. You can have something that is really, really fast with totally dynamic stuff, and you can get rid of all of this spinner madness as people are loading your site where things just bounce around all over the place, and it's awful. Go log into your bank account, log into your power company, your government website, whatever, you're going to have this sort of experience, and it's not a good one. I've thought about logging into my bank account because I see like 12 spinners when I log into my bank account, but then I'd be logging into my bank account. So you got to believe me, you've seen this before, I know, where things just bounce into place and it's not a good experience. And it's just because of the way that we've architected things, because we think that this is going to be faster. Well, news for you, or news flash for everybody, it's not necessarily faster. You can make a server rendered app really, really fast, just as fast as static site generation. So on top of that, because Remix embraces progressive enhancement, I found out when building my site that I could build a bunch of mutation-related stuff. Oh, I can't show you because this is dynamic and I'm logged in. I have user accounts on my website too. Couldn't have done that very easily with Gatsby. But I found out that like I can make really cool experiences that work without JavaScript, and that's neat and everything, that it works without JavaScript. But it actually most people do have JavaScript, but here's why that is really important, why progressive enhancement matters. You might think that a company like YouTube.com would have a pretty significant budget for making their sites really fast. Like they probably spend a lot of time on that. When you're in the entertainment industry in particular, you don't want to make people wait for your stuff. And so in this little demo, I set the network to slow 3G so that we can see what's going on. We can talk about it while it's happening. But I'm going to go to youtube.com. I've never been there before. Nothing's cached, whatever. We're going to see what the loading experience is like. So the first thing that happens is we get a skeleton UI. This is really common for applications built this way. We get this skeleton UI while we're waiting for the application to load. We're basically downloading and installing an application. On the right here, you'll see desktop_polymer.js is downloading, and it's enormous. It's huge, but the entire application can't do anything, not even show the search bar until that has been downloaded. So they basically don't give you anything. And when that search bar is given, I type in a search and I hit enter and it gets cleared. So they haven't even downloaded enough of the JavaScript to actually do anything here either. What we're waiting for now is this base.js file that is also quite large in itself before we can actually start using the app at all. So of course I could click on any of these suggestions that they have on their homepage, but I want to do a search. And I'm not just making this up. This isn't just something that happens when you're on slow 3G. This happened to me as a user. That's how I discovered this. I wasn't like hunting around the internet, like what are some really good examples that can be a straw man for my whatever I'm trying to talk about. This is a real world experience that I had when I was using youtube.com. And I was really blown away. I was on like fast internet and everything too. I was just blown away that YouTube had this problem when they have basically an infinite budget. And so this is not a problem that's just like, oh, well, if you were smarter, had better engineers, you wouldn't have these problems. No, if you implement progressive enhancement, then you can make it so that your application starts working as soon as the HTML shows up. And if you server render, you can make it so the HTML shows up a lot sooner. And that is one of the biggest value propositions of Remix, is that we server render and we progressively enhance. You can server render with Next.js, but I haven't seen a Next.js application that worked, that you could actually start using forms and stuff before the application loaded. And that's a core component, or a core value proposition of Remix, is that everything works before the JavaScript finishes loading, because JavaScript is used to enhance the user experience, not to enable it. And so, yeah, if we, in this example, if we had like a trash can icon in here or something, we could actually click that trash can icon before the JavaScript finishes loading, and it would totally work because of the way that Remix is architected, and as you're using it. So that's one of the really cool things that I loved about as I was using Remix. It's like, wow, progressive enhancement is coming back. Like it's hip again. And so that was cool. Another really cool aspect of it is, well, I've got like a bunch of other things that I want to talk about. So well, we're going to scroll down. We're going to say goodbye to Spinageddon. It's the worst. Another really cool thing about Remix is because it's not only your bundler, but also your routing library and your data fetching library. Because it's all of those things, it knows just by looking at the URL what resources the user is going to need. And so when you're rendering a bunch of links on the page, Remix can look at the URL that those links are going to, and it can say, oh, I know exactly what like CSS is going to be needed. I know what JavaScript will be needed, and data. So I don't have to wait for the JavaScript to download before I know what data is needed. There's no waterfall effect here. I can just go get it all. And so as the user is using your application, we can start preloading stuff as we see, oh, the user's moving their mouse over this way. They're probably going to click on this link. Let's go ahead and prefetch all of this stuff. And so it prefetches the JavaScript, the data, the CSS, whatever else it needs. And then by the time the user clicks, that all is in the browser cache. And so when Remix says, hey, I need this stuff, the browser's like, sweet, I've already got it. Here it is. And so everything feels very instant. And what's really cool about this is prefetching is not like a new thing from the Remix team. People have been doing this for a long time. But the thing is that we're using the platform, and you can use the platform like with Webpack. They have their magic comments and stuff. And the fact is, though, that you have to do the wiring up, because Webpack is not your router and it's not your fetching library. It is just your bundler. And so you have to wire things up. Whereas Remix, because it's all three of those things, it can add those link tags. What typically happens, though, is people will normally just load the data in memory. And so they'll use React Query or use SWR or some of these libraries, and they'll say, oh, the user's going to go over there. Let's go prefetch that stuff. And they'll put it in memory. Well, what happens when you start managing a cache in memory is you're managing a cache in memory. And so you can run out of memory on a low-end device. And so you have to start thinking about garbage collection and stuff like that, like lower level stuff that you probably shouldn't be thinking about. And then on top of that, it's in memory. And so if the user refreshes the browser or closes it or something, then that's totally gone. And so if you want it to stick around, you have to start thinking about persistence in local storage or IndexedDB or something like that. If you're using the platform, though, you can just say, hey, here are some link tags. Browser, go fetch this stuff. The browser sticks these resources into its own cache. And then if you close the browser and open it back up again, it's still there because the browser's managing that. If the user's device is low on memory, then the browser has already managed memory for that. And so it can either like persist it, or it can just blow it away if it feels like that's more optimal. And on top of all that, the code required for us to do this is just like that much. It's not a lot of code for us to do this, so that's less likely to run into bugs. And so that's another thing that I love about Remix, is that it enables you to use the platform unlike anything else. So I love that, and I love that it makes the user experience feel just so fast. And that's actually exactly what happens on my site. So every single page that you go to on my site is unique for you. So there's no HTTP caching going on here. So these blog recommendations are recommended to me because I'm logged in, and I keep track of the blog posts that you've read before. Of course, it's a bad example because it's me, and I literally wrote all of these blog posts, but I haven't read them since I deployed this feature. So these are blog posts I haven't read yet. And if I refresh, then I'm going to give you different blog post recommendations just to kind of spice it up because I can. And so like one of them is like completely random. Another one, if you're on a particular blog post, like down at the bottom here, we're going to say, okay, one of these is going to be random. One of them is going to be related to the one you're reading right now. And then another one is one of the top 6 most popular blog posts in recent history. And so, yeah, every time you refresh this page, it's totally random. And also, like, did you notice how fast this thing is? This is server rendered. This is going to a server. For me, it's in Dallas. For you all, it's in Amsterdam. And it's talking to a database, a Postgres database and a Redis cache. And it's all happening in like 250 milliseconds. So yeah, fast. It's great. And I get dynamic stuff and I can do all sorts of really fun things. And so, yeah, but anyway, what I wanted to talk about was because there's so much going on, as you're navigating around the site, I am prefetching the data and pages for each one of these. So for example, my workshops, all of this that like loads really fast, but all of this came from the Tito API like just now. And so we can actually talk to third-party APIs for loading all of this data. Now, sometimes weird things happen. That actually has never happened before. What the heck? That was really weird. The network is weird sometimes. That was a bad example. Let's go back. Let's do it again. Okay, see, normally it's like crazy fast. That has never happened, I promise. You're lucky, I guess. But yeah, wherever you're navigating, we're prefetching for you. Like one of the slowest things is this, or no, it's actually the chats podcast. Because I'm hitting the Simplecast API, which is like a silly amount of data that I have to go through to create these pages. It's kind of annoying actually. But I can cache that stuff myself. I can make it really fast, and it's all prefetched, so it's a pretty dang fast experience for users, which I think is pretty sick. Okay, so we talked a lot about data loading, and data loading is awesome. And as far as like the code is concerned, I'm going to show you a demo here in a little bit to show you what data loading is like. But let's talk about mutations. And my demo is also going to talk about mutations a little bit. So, but I just want to mention a couple of really cool things about mutations. Lots of frameworks are like, yeah, data loading. Here's your GraphQL thing you can write to load your data at build time. And then, or here's your use SWR hook or your React query hook or whatever. And that's fine. They all have their different trade-offs. But yeah, and Remix has a really great data loading story that we'll talk about later. But mutations is one thing that pretty much every application needs, and not many frameworks really deal with very well. Whether you're a front-end framework like Next or Gatsby, or a back-end framework like Rails or Django or Laravel or whatever, they have mutation stories, but they have some serious issues with them. I'm going to be coming from the front-end perspective because most people listening are probably primarily front-end engineers. But there are a lot of really cool things that Remix does that your back-end frameworks do not do very well. And actually some of them apply to what I'm about to share here. So first of all, mutations, since the beginning of mutations on the web, have always worked with a form. And so Remix decided, hey, we're going to do the same thing. It's all forms. And you put in your inputs and your submit button, and boom, that's your form. And when you're doing a mutation, you're probably mutating something on the back end. Now, like if you're just building a 100% in-browser app, we actually have some really cool things coming in the future for you too, with service worker support and stuff. But for most of us, we have to do some sort of server mutation of some kind. And so what Remix says is, because that's an important aspect of the mutation story, that mutation story is incomplete unless you have that totally solidified. A lot of frameworks would just be like, hey, we send fetch requests. And so we support mutations. No, Remix is like, hey, we will allow you to run or to write your code on the back end through this action function. And it's in the same file where the form is being rendered. And so here we have our form, and in the same file, you have your action. And this runs only on the server. That means you can do all of your validation logic in here and be totally safe, and it totally works. If you want to reuse that validation logic on the client for a progressively enhanced experience, you can totally do that, because you literally just take the code and move it into a function and call it in both places, and now you've shared code across client and server. And so, yeah, that's really awesome. Another thing about this is this request object that you get in your action, and the object that's returned from this redirect helper. Those are requests and responses from the web fetch API. And so you spend more of your time working with web fetch API stuff than you spend learning about Remix specific idioms around requests and response. And so a lot of people are really pleased with the fact that they spend a lot more time on MDN than they do on the Remix docs, because what Remix does is, instead of wrapping the web fetch API or the platform specific APIs for different cloud providers, we will wrap those, but wrap them in a web fetch API and expose the web fetch API to you. And so much of what Remix is doing is like getting out of the way just enough for you to interact with actual web APIs, which is really cool. So the more you learn Remix, the better you get at building websites with or without Remix. So that's really awesome. Another thing that Remix does is, as soon as the user makes that post request, it emulates what the browser has always done for forms. So what happens when the user submits a regular form without any JavaScript is the browser will do a refresh post request to your server, and the server responds with some HTML or sends, if it does things properly, it'll send a redirect. Because if you just respond with HTML, you hit the back button and it'll resubmit, which is not what you want. So you want to redirect. But in any case, what ultimately happens is, when the whole thing is said and done, everything that's on the page is the latest up-to-date information, because you just sent a request and we sent back everything that should be on the page. So everything is up to date. There's no client-side state going on at all. Of course, when you're using JavaScript, you do want client-side state, because you want to have like a really nice experience, transitions and all of this stuff. So there's some stuff on the front end. What we've been doing for the last 6 years before Remix showed up was we would just say, okay, make this post request. It comes back with the updated data. Let's go update our client-side data that was changed right now. And we'll just keep that up to date with whatever's in the backend. Remix says, that's all cool and all, but let's do what the web has always done. And instead, we will go ahead and refetch all of the data that is on the page. So that post finishes successfully. We're like, sweet, let's go get all of the data on the page up to date. And so when you're writing or building a Remix app, you never think about application state management for the client. You don't. It's just not a thing. So Redux with Remix, yes, it works. No, you don't need it. You get rid of your Redux. You don't need it. It's unnecessary. MobX, RxJS, all of these libraries for managing your client-side state, you don't need them. You can use them. They work. It's all still React after all. But you definitely don't need them, because Remix says, hey, let's go back to the way that the web has always worked, and just revalidate everything automatically for you. And because Remix is managing your routing, your bundling, and your fetching, it can do a lot of really cool things that you have to wire together yourself, which most people don't even bother. And you end up with a lot of bugs on the front end. On top of all of this, if the user decides, hey, I made this mutation, but I'm actually going to make this other mutation right away, then what's going to happen in that situation is all of a sudden the things that we were getting to refresh all of our data, that stuff's wrong now, because the user just made another mutation. So we actually automatically will cancel that for you. We'll make that mutation, and then we'll go get the latest stuff. And so in addition to managing all of this for you, you also will not have race conditions or form resubmission bugs, which is really, really nice. So you don't have to think about managing that state. It's really cool. On top of that, we also expose a really cool API for pending states, which I'll show you in the demo. and optimistic UI, which is even better and it's awesome. I can't wait to show you that too. Okay, so one other thing I want to show you before the demo, and that is nested routing. So if you're using Gatsby or Next, you probably are familiar with nested routing from a file structure standpoint. You've got your pages directory, and then there are subdirectories there that all map to the route. The difference between the file-based nested routing and true nested routing that Remix has is that with true nested routing, when you get down to that leaf route, so the last part of the last segment of your URL, the UI that you're writing in that file and the data that you're loading for that file is only relevant to the nested part of the route that we're dealing with. So in our case, that's just this this invoice ID part of the route. All the other parts of the routes are managed by that particular route file. And so this contrasts to Gatsby and Remix and Next.js because when you're working in those, you're responsible for the entire page. So if you're in the invoice ID route, that component that you're exporting isn't just responsible for this part of the page, it's responsible for the entire page, the header, the left nav, the footer, the everything. And so what that means is, like, it's not a huge deal because you just make a component and reuse that component. But if you want to server render all that stuff, now you're responsible for, and you don't want to show a bunch of loading states and stuff, you're responsible for not only loading data for your part of the screen, but also for your parents. And so if the left nav changes in some significant way, you have to update every single route that uses the left nav. And whether that be like a data requirement or just some special prop that you need to add or whatever. So this has a significant impact on developer productivity, especially with teams. So you have one team that's responsible for the left nav and everything, like maybe the home page or something. They need to make a change to this or whatever. And now they have to go talk to the other teams that are responsible for other pages that are impacted by their change. Whereas with Remix's true routing, nested routing, you don't even have to bother talking to each other. The team over the root who's responsible for that can make it all the changes that they want to, and it's not going to impact your route at all. So it just makes you way more productive. It also makes Remix really capable of optimizing the data that's being loaded and everything too. So for example, the invoices here is loading the overdue amount and the due soon amount, and it's rendering out this nice thing. It's also loading the data for the list items right here. And then as the user navigates between these different list items, it knows that it doesn't need to reload any of this data. Remix knows that, oh, well, this is the only part of the page that's changing. So if this is all that's changing as the user chooses a different item, we don't need to refetch everything else. We can just fetch this part. So Remix, because it is your bundler, your router, and your data fetching library, it can optimize some really awesome things for you. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We also have contextual error boundaries and stuff that work on the server render, which React error boundaries do not work on the server render. So we make it work, and it's awesome. Contextual error boundaries with nested routing will blow your minds, but we've got to move on to the demo here, and then I'm happy to take questions and stuff too. So I've got this little Remix app. I'm going to sign up for an account right now because I think I reset my database. Nope, just kidding. I think I need to handle that error better. Let's see. Or I think I may have screwed up my database. Dang it. I need to do a Prisma thing really quick. I was making some changes and I messed something up. I think it's reset. I can't remember. Let's see what it is really quick. Okay. Now let's run that again. Oh, did you see how fast the server started up? Look at that, 196 milliseconds. Get rid of that 30-second start time. Holy smokes, this thing's fast. My website is 26,000 lines of code around thereabouts, and it uses some different libraries and stuff, and it builds in less than half a second. It's a glorious future we live in, my friends. It's so nice. Okay, so let's sign up now. Cody rocks. Here we go. Okay, now we're signed in. So we've got a notes app. This is fun. So I can say 1, 2, whoops, 2, and 3, and then I can delete, delete, delete. All good, right? This is great. I want to show you something that happens when I disable JavaScript really quick. Not many people do this. Like nobody's really disabling JavaScript these days. But I want to show you like the difference between something that's progressively enhanced and something that just works with regular forms. I'm trying to think maybe before I do this, I want to show you how the code for this works. So I'm going to do that really quick before I show you that. And then we'll look at things, how they work before we load JavaScript and stuff. Okay, so probably the key thing here is our default export. So here we're rendering a form for the logout. We're rendering, yeah, that's something people don't often do, put a form around a button. But for progressive enhancement, you need to do that, and it works, and it's awesome. We've got a form for our creating a new note, and then we've got our list of notes right here. This data is coming from this special hook called use loader data. That's coming from Remix. So Remix is responsible, again, it's your fetching library. So Remix is responsible for getting this data, and this will be server rendered. And then when it's rehydrated, it'll be available from that server render. And so we don't actually render this component until the data is ready. So you'll notice I don't have any loading states of any kind in here to say, if there's no data, then show this loading spinner. We don't do that in Remix. You do have the ability, like as you're making transitions, sometimes it does take time to load data. Sometimes the user's on a slow network. And so you do have the ability to opt into showing loading states in certain parts of the application. You noticed on mine, I had a little thing in the bottom right corner that would show if the request took too long. But you don't have to do that in like every single component that you're requesting data, which is really awesome. You can, but you don't have to. It's pretty sweet. So yeah, that data though is coming from this function called a loader. And the loader is responsible for talking to the database and all the stuff. So this only runs on the server. This does not run in the client. You can use your private keys. You can talk to your database. You can talk to your, whatever you're doing in your use effect to go fetch data, take all of that code and move it into the loader. And now all of a sudden it's running on the server. And Remix is automatically keeping things up to date for you. That's basically the migration story for most people. Take your data fetching stuff you're doing on the client, move it to a loader, and now you don't have to, now a lot of your bugs are gone. Or at least it would be that way for me at PayPal. Like if I went back to PayPal, I'd rewrite everything in Remix and get rid of all the bugs that I always had to work on. I mean, responsibly, we've got a business. We can't just like stop all development and rewrite everything. But yeah, we would migrate to Remix for sure if I was still at PayPal. So anyway, this just says, hey, let's return a JSON response. This is basically the same as return new response, JSON stringify the notes, and then with the right headers and stuff like that for the content type and whatever. So that's all this JSON thing does. It also does some type checking for me to make sure I'm sending back the stuff that I want to. Okay, and so then I got my data. No loading states, don't have to worry about that. It's really awesome. And then for these forms, we have the action side of things. So we have a form there. We also have a form for each of the delete buttons. And to disambiguate between the different forms that we have, because they're both going to post to this action, I have a special field on that form called an underscore action, because unfortunately you can't add a regular action field to a form, to form data. That's just a web platform thing. Don't get mad at me. Get mad at whoever designed this thing, I guess. But anyway, we can disambiguate which form we're submitting based on the button that is clicked. And so a button can have a name and a value. Fun fact, that was something I learned when I started doing Remix. And so whichever button we click on, whether it be save or delete, we can know what action the user is trying to take, and we can perform our work accordingly. So we can get out of the request, we get the form data. That's a web platform API. Again, that's web fetch stuff. So if you don't like the fact that we're doing get instead of like just giving you an object, take it up with the web platform. But you can totally turn this into an object. Entries, and then say object from entries. Boom. Now it's an object. So if that's like a big deal for you, web platform is pretty cool. It can do some sweet things. Okay, so anyway, we get the action type and then we say, oh, the action type is delete. No, they're trying to delete. So let's find out which one they are trying to delete. So we don't require the user to enter the ID. That is through a hidden input. This is anybody who's been around with the web for a really long time. This will be very familiar. This is the way that we used to do things. Well, that's what hidden inputs are for. We can stick those into the form. And heck, like you could say the value is a like JSON stringify thing and put like whatever the heck you want to in there, like controlled state, whatever you want. And you get access to all of that on in your action. So anyway, we're going to pull that out of the form data, and then we'll delete the note. If we're creating, then we're going to pull out the title and we'll create the note. And then we'll just redirect them back to the notes. The redirect is important because if you don't redirect, then if the user hits the back button, they'll get that like confirm resubmission dialog thing. That is not good. So we redirect on success. Okay, cool. So that's how this all works. It's all in one file and it's pretty sweet. And now I want to show you why progressive enhancement is pretty great and what it means to actually progressively enhance stuff. So if I don't load my JavaScript failed to load for some reason. I'm on a slow network. Maybe my network is spotty. That's why the JavaScript failed to load. Or maybe the JavaScript is still loading while I do this stuff and I finish my work before the JavaScript's finished loading, like the YouTube example. So if I say this is a note and I hit save, what happens is there was no JavaScript to prevent default. So I'm going to get the default behavior of a spinner up there. And as a user, I'm going to see that and I'm going to be like, oh, okay, sweet. Like the application is doing something. It may be kind of slow, but at least I know that it's doing something. Same thing for the delete. Application seems kind of slow, but I know that it's doing something. There's a refresh. Something's going on. So that's great. That's a good baseline. Your app should work in those conditions. That makes it resilient. So if we don't have JavaScript disabled, here, let's turn off throttling really quick. JavaScript, enable JavaScript. We'll refresh. So JavaScript is on the page. We'll throttle it again. Now I want you to watch what happens here. What? I hit save. There's no loading indicator because we're not refreshing, but there's no indicator at all. There's nothing. We just progressively enhanced a worse experience because now we have JavaScript. Now, of course, you're all great front-end developers. You would never leave the user hanging. When they hit save, you were going to put a loading spinner in there or something. And so that's what we've got to do when we're progressively enhancing. You don't want to progressively enhance a worse experience. So you do want to put some sort of loading state in there when the user has a slow network. Same thing is going on with the delete. And so I want to show you how you can add that loading state here in this case. So what's really cool, though, on top of all of this is even though you don't have a loading state and stuff, if the user were to like hit save a bunch of times, it's going to do the right thing. Remix will correctly delete the thing that they deleted, or they'll hit save or whatever. It's going to do the right thing. But it's not optimal to not have a loading state. So let's add one. We're going to have this thing called a transition. Nope, that's not what it is. Thanks, Copilot. It's called use transition. And transition is a really cool thing. This is not the React 18 use transition thing that they're still haven't released yet or whatever. This is a thing from Remix. And this is going to tell us anytime the user is making a route change of any kind. And a form submission is a route change in this case. So I'm going to say is saving. And we'll say transition dot submission. So if there's a transition and there happens to be a submission associated to that, so they submitted a form, that submission is going to have some form data. This is going to be what the user submitted. And so then I'm going to say, hey, let's get that form data is going to exist. So we'll get the action. And if that action is create note, then we know that we're saving. And so now I'm going to just on the button, I'll say disabled. Saving, and I'll say is saving dot otherwise save. You can do your loading spinners or whatever else you want to do, but that is literally it. I have now made a loading state for my form. So I come over here and I say saving this, boom, and now I've got a nice loading state. I've got the disabled button. I can show the user, hey, I see you, I know what's going on, I am going to submit this for you. Ta-da, this is awesome. And so it's not only is it a really simple thing to implement, but it also means that you actually have a progressively enhanced form. Because again, if I empty cache and hard reload, And when the HTML loads, I start loading all of the JavaScript. As soon as that finishes, here we go. Hi. And I hit save. Before the JavaScript finished loading, then I'm actually creating, I think I hit it twice, so it's going to create 2 of them. But it actually worked. So that's pretty sweet. I think that is an awesome feature of progressive enhancement. So even if you're on a slow network, you can actually start using the app before the JavaScript's finished loading. That's cool. But what's even cooler, I think, is that what we can do when the JavaScript has loaded with really simple code. So the last thing that I want to show you is let's do the same thing for the delete button. And so this is going to be our transition. Here we go. And we're going to say is deleting is transition dot submission. Did I spell something wrong? Yeah, transition. Here it is. Submission dot form data dot get. And let's just get the note ID. We'll cheat a little bit. So if the note ID is the same as the ID of the note that we're displaying, then we know that we're deleting this note because we have no other form on the page that will have the note ID. We could add, like, make sure that it's also the action is delete note, but I'm not going to do that right now. So we'll say disabled is deleting and then deleting. Yes, thank you, Copilot. Okay, so now with this in place, that looks pretty familiar. It's basically the same sort of idea. Find out whether there's a transition with the submission of form data with the node ID. Just identify whether the submission or the transition is submitting this particular form. And if it is, then we can disable the button and show a loading state. And so let's hit delete here, and that is totally deleting. And we get that pending state and everything. It looks awesome. Even though it's a little bit slow, we can at least, you can't always control the network. Sometimes the user's got a slow network. But I want to show you one other thing that is a problem that we're going to fix. And that is every single time we submit one of these forms, whether it be the saving button or the delete button, we're actually adding an entry in our history stack. Because remember, these are transitions. And in a lot of situations, that makes sense. Like if I were creating this note and then navigating the user over to like a details page or something, that would make total sense. Like you're making a project. Okay, here's the project details. Boom. Now we're going to go over to that project page. In this app, this is just like a to-do list, basically. And so you don't have specific pages for those. Redirecting the user back to the same page that they're on doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like I hit the back button a bunch of times. Like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so and there are a lot of application use cases like this. You have both of these. And so because of that, we have the global transition with this use transition hook that'll say, hey, there's only one transition happening at a time. It's impossible to do anything else. When you're building a web app, you can like transition from one URL to another. But the user can perform multiple actions at one time, especially if you want to have like a rich user experience as they're like checking off a bunch of items and stuff like that. And so what happens in our current implementation is not exactly what we want, even though it technically is correct. There aren't bugs, it's just suboptimal. So watch this. I hit delete, 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 delete. I want to delete all of them. What? Only one of them is deleting? I'm confused. And then, oh, no, things are good. Things are good. So what happened was every single time I made a mutation, remember Remix is like, oh, hold on a second. You hit the delete button, but then you hit another delete button. You're submitting another form. So whatever comes back from that other one doesn't even matter anymore. I'll just cancel the request. It's not like it can stop the server from processing it. That's not really possible. Once the request is out, it's out. But I'm going to cancel it because I don't care about what comes back. Because I'm sending a new one. And it did that for each one of these until the last one when it's like, okay, cool. You're not submitting another form. So I'll send that request. It'll come back. And then I'll go and refetch everything. So what's really cool is that like the right thing happened. I clicked all those delete buttons. It just didn't look very good at all. And that's because we only can have one transition at a time. So if you have a UI where it's not really transitioning anywhere, it doesn't make sense, then we're going to change things a little bit. But I want you to pay really close attention to what I have to do here, because we're going to change the entire feature without changing a lot of code or even the mental model. So for one thing, keep a good eye on the action code that's running on the server and the fact that we're not going to look at this again because we don't need to change any of it. So we, instead of a use transition, we're going to call this other hook called use fetcher. And use fetcher also comes from Remix, and it has a very similar API to use transition, but I'm going to call this a fetcher instead, just because it makes more sense. So we're not going to need to even change this. The only thing that we change is, instead of using the form, which is basically the transitions form, we're going to use a fetcher form. And that's it. I've just solved the bug, completely changed the way that, that this operates from a user experience standpoint without having to change my mental model for how I do this. And so if I come over here, let's speed it up so I can submit a bunch of these. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4 with an E, I guess. We'll slow this down again, and then delete, 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 delete. And what did I do? I messed something up. That was weird. I'm not sure what that was about. I will figure that out later. I've done this demo like 30 times. Well, maybe not 30, but like 10 times. That's never happened before. So I messed something up. But that's really weird. But we could also do, well, I'll have to take a look at that later. I don't want to dig myself into a deeper hole with this demo. But it works, and it normally works, and I'm not sure what I messed up. I'll let you all know if I figure it out later. But that's the really key thing here, is that we're leveraging the mental model of Web 1.0 with the amazing user experience that you can have with Web 2.0 or 3.0 or whatever .0s you're doing these days. We can leverage the coolness of the technology of modern web and progressively enhance your web apps so that they work really, like the mental model is simple as you're maintaining the code, and the user experience is more bug-free. Because Remix is your bundler, your router, and your fetching library, and it's fetching awesome, I guess. So that is it. That's everything for me. I'm not going to demo anything else for fear of breaking something again. But I'm happy to stick around for as long as you'd like to answer any questions that you've got. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions?
Victor says that I didn't save. Maybe that was the problem. So we'll go with that.
All right, nice.
Yes, Jonas.
Yes. So where do you think that Remix is headed next?
Yeah, no pun intended, I imagine, with the next reference. No, just kidding.
Obviously not, no.
Yeah, it's impossible to not make that pun. Yeah, so I guess that's why they changed their name from Now to Vercel, because they had a lot of problems too. Yeah, so where is Remix going? Well, first of all, we're going, I always forget to mention this, we are going to Salt Lake City in May. So if any of you want to fly out to Salt Lake City in May, the early bird ends today, and the call for speakers also ends today. So get your talk proposals in if you haven't already. But yeah, where are we going? We are going, my personal goal for Remix is to make the web a better place for developers and for users. And that means providing a really awesome framework for whatever you're trying to do on the web, whatever web experience you're trying to create. And so right now, as soon as Remix released 1.0, it was that was a signal that it's production ready. My site has been running really smoothly on Remix since then, and I keep it on the latest, you know, because it's good for me to make sure. Currently, my site is still technically the largest deployment of Remix in the world, because it takes some time to write, you know, make big sites, and we just released Remix officially in November. But we are talking to some big companies that you know their names, but I'm not sure I'm permitted to tell you who they are, but you absolutely know who they are, and they are really excited about using Remix. We are one feature that is coming pretty soon is Remix has really nailed the part of web application development from a maintenance standpoint. Like, you can maintain a quality application for into the future, you know, adapt to changes as they come, work on a big team and everything. we've really nailed that because of the abstractions and just the architecture of Remix. The thing that we're trying to improve now is the getting started experience. So I got this application up and running in like 5 minutes with a Postgres database and everything. I switched it later to SQLite because it was easier to manage for this demo. But yeah, like we've got a really, really nice getting started situation, but we want to make that even better. And so that's something, we've got a really big, exciting thing coming soon that will help people get started even faster. And then we also want to do a lot of real-time stuff as well. So we've got, it's not really an RFC, but basically a proposal of what our real-time APIs are going to look like. They're going to be really good. So look forward to that as well. And in general, we just want to take whatever people are typically doing to build their websites and make doing those things easier. So long as they're good for the user, because some of us are doing things for our websites that are not good for the user, just good for us, and it's a little selfish of us. So we want to make excellent user experiences and an awesome developer experience, because that's an input into user experience as well. Does that answer your question, Jonas?
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you for a really interesting presentation and a wonderful framework.
Well, thank you for listening and for your question. Any other questions? Okay, sweet. Well, so here's how you get started with Remix. If you want to jump in, first I would say get into our Discord community. That's the best place to ask questions and get answers and stuff. Feel free to tweet at me, but I get tweeted at a lot, and I typically will just tell you to go to Discord instead, because it's a lot easier to manage that way. And we also have a really awesome set of videos on YouTube to kind of help you get an idea of how things work in Remix. And then we do have active GitHub discussions as well. And then in our docs, we have our 2 getting started guides. So we have the quick start, that'll be like, that's a half-hour commitment sort of thing. And then we have the Jokes app, which is a really deep dive, basically like Epic React, the last workshop of Epic React. So it's like basically 4 workshops in one. It takes about, it took me 6 hours to go through it in my live stream, where I'm like explaining things as I go. So it's a pretty big thing that has a bunch of stuff in there, like setting up a database and hand rolling authentication with email and password and stuff. So a lot of stuff in there. So we have some pretty good resources for getting started, and our docs are always improving. So if that's what, if you want to get going with Remix, then that is a good way to get going. So cool. Are we all set? All happy?
Yeah, I think so. No, sorry.
I have a quick question, since I wasn't able to join in person, if it's okay. I was just wondering how many people that are there are actually using Remix, or are you all just interested?
Yeah, so Remix has had a really awesome explosion of interest, and I've noticed a lot of frameworks like to say that about their framework. I'm not going to do this, but you can feel free to take a look at the NPM installs, compare it to other frameworks that were released around the same time to kind of compare what the interest is. There is enormous interest in Remix. So like I said earlier, there are a number of companies that we're talking with right now that you definitely would recognize their logo, even without their name, that are heavily interested in Remix. They may or may not be member or pictured here in our sponsors on the Remix Conf. So I don't know, maybe there are some of these logos that you recognize that might be kind of interested in using Remix. So anyway, Remix has had a lot of interest. It is still pretty early days. We just released in November, the official 1.0. My own personal biased projections, I expect Remix to outstrip SvelteKit in the next 6 months at least, and Gatsby in the next year. It is growing at that rate where that makes a lot of sense, and it's just really solid. That's why it's growing. Like, people try it and they keep using it. So yeah. Anyway, that's where it's at right now.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for putting this together, Nicholas. This is awesome. Really excited that we've got a meetup there in Sweden. I've been to Sweden before. It was the first international place I ever went, actually. I was in Stockholm for JFocus, and I didn't realize when I submitted my talk that it was international. So they said, "You're accepted. Schedule your flights." And I was scheduling. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is in Stockholm." And I loved it. It was awesome. I'd love to come out to Sweden again in the future. So if you ever want to put a Remix conference together or something, then I'd definitely love to come out. But anyway, hope to meet you in the future sometime, and keep going strong with the meetup. It's awesome that you're doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
See you all
you.
later.